Okay, third grade, here is part 13. Matilda's book also recounted at least 24 versions of the original tale. The story Sabrina had always heard involved a woman who begged Rumpelstiltskin for help. In exchange, she promised to give him her firstborn child. When the baby finally arrived, the woman demanded a chance to keep it. So Rumpelstiltskin wagered that she would never be able to guess his real name. Of course, by the end of the story, she had figured it out and got to keep her kid, making the little man so angry he actually ripped himself in two. But Matilda said there was an alternative version of the ending that not many people knew. In the other ending, Rumpelstiltskin did not rip himself in half. He actually blew up like a bomb, killing everyone within a mile. The next chapter, entitled The Power of Rumpelstiltskin, contained theories on the source of the little man's power. Matilda believed he was like a walking battery. He stored energy and converted it into destructive power. Unfortunately, the more of Matilda's theories Sabrina read, the more questions she asked. "It doesn't make any sense," Sabrina cried. "What do Rumpelstiltskin, the Pied Piper, the Children of Ever Afters, and a bunch of tunnels under the school have in common?" "The barrier," Puck replied. "What?" "The barrier runs very close to the school, and we flew into it. Don't you remember?" "You're just telling me this now?" Sabrina cried. "Seems obvious to me," the trickster replied. "They're digging into the barrier," Snow White gasped. "Baba Yaba's spell is probably not as strong underground. But what would be the point? They still need a powerful magic explosion to get through it." "I think they've got one," Sabrina said, holding up her great-aunt's book. Matilda thought Rumpelstiltskin was a walking nuclear bomb. He might be able to make a crack in it. "Still, they have the river to worry about. The waters will drown them all," Snow White pointed out. "Maybe not," Delphine said, rushing to the bookshelf and snatched down one of the family's journals. She ran over to the table, put it down in front of Sabrina. It was their grandfather Basil's journal. Granny had this out one afternoon and forgot to put it away, the little girl said. "I was flipping through it and found some maps Grandpa Basil drew of the town." She flipped it open and searched for the page. When she found it, she pointed to it for her sister. "Today, I did a little amateur map making of the elementary school construction site, claiming I was just interested in the building. Charming hates when he thinks I'm snooping, but I wanted to make sure no one got any ideas about digging the hole deeper or building a tunnel over the river. The barrier is much weaker underground. Baba Yaga's compensated through extending it over the Hudson River. If anyone tried to tunnel through, they'd drown. The only chance they'd have would be to somehow dig through the bedrock under the river over to Bannerman Island. But without any army of miners, they'd never get close. I feel pretty confident that it's impossible." April 1957. Sabrina flipped the page and found a hand-drawn map of the town and the surrounding areas. A circle enclosed the town, and Grandpa Basil had written "the barrier" on it as a label. She had to admit the circle wasn't very big. Mount Taurus was inside it, as well as the edge of the Hudson River. But it wasn't a lot of room. She found the very spot where Puck had slammed into the barrier and dumped them all into the river. It was close to the school, as was a tiny island that sat right on the barrier. Sabrina had never noticed Bannerman's Island before, but there it was on her grandfather's map. Kids, let's calm down, Snow White insisted. Grandfather was right. Without a crew of workers, it would take Rumpelstiltskin decades to tunnel to the barrier. Your grandmother and the sheriff will stop him and the Piper tonight. See, that's where I'm confused, Sabrina said. What does the Pied Piper have to offer in all of this? If Rumpelstiltskin can blow a hole in the barrier, then what does he need with a guy whose claim to fortune is leading a bunch of rats out of town? Maybe he's using the rats to chew through the rocks, Puck said. That's stupid, Sabrina said. You're stupid, he shouted back. Maybe he's not using rats, Snow White said uncomfortably. What else could he use? Asked Sabrina. You don't know how the Pied Piper story ended, do you? The girls shook their heads. Apparently their father, no fairy tale rule, was coming back to haunt them again. He drowned the rats and became a big hero, right? Dolphine said. Well, he did drown the rats, but he didn't do it to become a hero. He did it for a paycheck. In his day, he used to travel from town to town, using his pipes to clean up messes. He drove the spiders out of Paris, the monkeys out of Bombay, and snakes out of Prague. But he did it for money. When he showed up in a Hamlin, the townspeople were desperate. They were completely overrun with vermin. What's vermin mean? Dolphine asked. Rats and mice, Sabrina explained. Rats were everywhere, Miss White continued. They spread a lot of disease and people were getting sick. Everything the town had tried hadn't worked. So the Piper agreed to handle their problem, and in no time he was leading the rats right into the ocean where they drowned. But that wasn't the end of the town's problems. When the Piper came back, he wanted payment, but the town refused to pay. They had used him, and he was furious. What happened? Sabrina asked, already sensing the story's unhappy ending. He gave them 24 hours to come up with the money, and when that time was up, they just laughed at him. So he blew into his bagpipes, and the town's children congregated around him. The Piper marched out of town with the children following behind him, just as the rats had. The families tried to stop them, but reports say the kids were in a trance and kept on following the music. The families never saw them again. So, of course, it makes a lot of sense to hire him to be principal of the elementary school, Sabrina said. Rats or brats, Puck said, before Snow White could explain. What's the difference? Suddenly, the truth dawned on Sabrina. He's providing the workforce, she cried. What are you talking about? Dolphine asked. The Piper has been using his magic to force the students to work at night. You've seen the kids in my class. They're exhausted. It's because they've been up working all night. We have to warn Granny. We can't do that, Snow White said. But, Miss White, we have to, Dolphine cried, rushing to the closet and returning with her deputy's hat tied to her head. The sheriff and Mr. Canis are with her. They'll figure this out before anyone gets hurt. What if they don't? Puck said. Sabrina was surprised. The boy usually acted as if he didn't care. What if they don't find out? We saw those tunnels. They go on and on. If Rumpelstiltskin blows a hole in the barrier, those walls will collapse on everyone inside. I thought you were a villain. If you come along, you're going to have to be a hero. As long as I'm ruining someone's day, I'm in, said Puck. Snow White looked from child to child and then reached for her car keys. Get your coats on, but if I think it's too dangerous, we turn right around. Soon they were rushing out the front door. They were in such a hurry, Snow White didn't see Mayor Charming coming up the path, and the two ran right into him. "Snow," Charming said, surprised. "Billy," the teacher whispered. They were holding hands in the cold air as Sabrina rolled her eyes. "We're not going to go through this again, are we?" she cried. "We've got to get going." "What's the rush?" Charming asked. "Rumpelstiltskin and the Pied Piper have been tunneling under the school for months and are looking for a weak spot in the barrier, in Baba Yaga's barrier, so that they can try to crack a hole in it and escape. And Granny and the sheriff and Mr. Candace and Wendell are there now trying to stop them. But they don't know that Rumpelstiltskin is like a living battery, and he has the power to create the hole. But if he does, he'll collapse the tunnel and everyone inside will die," Dolphine said. Charming stood still with wide eyes. "What was that again?" he asked. "We're going to save the day," Miss White said. "We'll take my car," the mayor declared, leading the group to a stretch limousine. Mr. Sevens was out of the driver's seat, but Charming waved him off. "Sevens, we're in a hurry." The little man crawled back into his seat, closed the door, and started the engine. Once everyone was inside, he pulled onto the road and sped off like a NASCAR driver, leaving a tire stain on the pavement behind them. "Billy, what are you doing here?" "I have something for the girls," the mayor exclaimed as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box of matches. Charming handed the box to Sabrina and smiled proudly. "We had a deal. Here's my end of the bargain." "Oh, thanks. I'll save these for the next time I need to build a campfire." "Child, those aren't ordinary matches," Charming groaned. "They're the little match girls' matches. I just handed you something people in town would kill for." Snow White gasped. "You told me they had been destroyed." "I was trying to protect you," Charming said. "If anyone knew those were still around, your life would be in danger." "Great. So you give them to us? Doesn't everyone hate us enough?" "Grimm, no one is going to know you have them, because you're going to use them right away." Sabrina peeked into the matches. 2 small wooden matches lay inside. "What do they do?" "I thought you two were supposed to be experts on fables and fairy tales. The Little Match Girl is one of Hans Christian Andersen's most famous accounts. You've been in our house. There are like 1,000,000 books in the bathroom alone." "We don't know everything yet," Sabrina said. "The Little Match Girl sold matches on the street for money," Snow White explained. "One day she came across a box of them and set out to make a little money to help feed her family. But it was horribly cold outside, and she was forced to light one. The flame became a magic portal leading to a room filled with food and a roaring fireplace. The girl realized she had just wished she were in such a place before striking the match. People have been looking for those matches for 100 years. They'll take a person anywhere they want to go, Sabrina. All you have to do is wish." "Like Dorothy's slippers?" Dolphine asked. She and her sister had used them to pop up all over town, but they lost one of them, while running from a giant. "They're more powerful than the slippers," Charming said. "You could take an ever after to the other side of the barrier, or they could take you to your parents." Sabrina stared down into the box, and a tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't deserve such an amazing gift, and she knew it. For weeks she had looked at every ever after as a suspect in her parents' kidnapping. She had turned everyone against her and practically broken her grandmother's heart. And yet, here was the most obnoxious, untrustworthy of the bunch, handing her the keys to find her parents. Why would you do this for us? Sabrina asked. We made a deal, Charming said, glancing at the pretty teacher. You could have used these to escape, said Snow White. There was something that kept me here, Charming said, staring into her eyes. The beautiful teacher leaned over and kissed the mayor. Billy, Charming, make me a promise. What kind of promise? He asked, somewhat breathless. When all of this is said and done. Take me to dinner, Snow White said. As long as we can leave your chaperones at home, he said with a grin. Mr. Sevens grumbled in the front seat. Oh, it's so romantic, Dolphine blubbered. I think I'm going to cry. I think I'm going to lose my lunch, Puck said. Suddenly, the car came to a screeching halt. Seven, why have we stopped? Charming demanded. The road is blocked, sir, the little man said, pointing out the window where a dozen children were walking in the middle of the street. They were all wearing pajamas and had glassy looks in their eyes. There are too many of them to maneuver around. The piper is controlling them, Sabrina said as they passed some of the kids. Sevens honked his horn, but it had no effect on the children. We have to walk from here. They got out of the car, leaving Sevens to guard it. Pack's wings sprang from his back, and he lifted off the ground. What I wouldn't do for a carton of eggs, he said. I'm going to go get some and play dive bomb on these zombies. Before he could fly away, Snow White grabbed his leg and yanked him back to ground. We should stay together, she said. The boy looked extremely disappointed, but his wings disappeared nonetheless. The group weaved in and out of the crowd until they were standing on the front lawn of the elementary school. As they approached the main entrance, Sabrina noticed that the front doors the giant mouse had plowed through were still lying on the ground. A steady stream of vacant-faced children were shuffling through the doorway, ushered in by a hulking girl with a pink ribbon in her hair. When Sabrina studied her closely, she realized it was Natalie. Natalie, you need to get as far away from here as you can, and try to get some of these kids to follow you. This place is going to get dangerous. Oh, it's going to get dangerous, all right, the big girl replied, as her skin began to bubble and inflate. Hair shot out from every pore, and two long fangs sprang upward from her bottom jaw. Her eyes turned milky yellow, and a long doghound tongue crept out of her mouth and licked her lips. Claws sprouted from her fingertips as she lashed out at the group, knocking Puck, Charming, Delphine, and Sabrina to the ground with one swipe. Snow White just managed to step aside, avoiding Natalie's attack. Egad, I didn't think you could get any uglier, Puck said as he crawled back to his feet. Snow, get behind me. I'll handle this brute, Charming shouted. Billy, the teacher cried. This is the 21st century. Women don't need the white knight routine anymore. I can fight my own battles. She planted her feet and raised her hands. When Natalie charged, the teacher sent a hard jab and a right hook into the beastie's face. The monster screamed angrily and lunged again, but this time Snow White's foot came up and landed a hard blow on the monster's chest. Natalie tumbled to the ground, but sprang back to her feet, clawing and scratching at the pretty teacher. Miss White blocked each blow with super fast hands until one of Natalie's punches actually connected and sent the teacher painfully to the ground. Instinctively, Puck and Charming stepped forward, ready to take over the fight, but Snow White flashed them an angry glance. Gentlemen, please, she said sternly. Charming and Puck threw up their hands in surrender and stepped aside. She sprung to her feet, planting them again, and then eyed the monster with a smile. "Come and get it, ugly," she said. "School is in session." Natalie roared and leapt at her. Snow White stopped the attack by jumping in the air, spinning around, and roundhousing the monster in the face. One of Natalie's fangs broke off in the middle, and the monster fell to the ground, groaning in pain. The teacher stood over her with angry eyes and eager fists. "If you're smart, you'll stay down," she said. Sabrina and Delphine looked at each other in amazement. "Snow, where did you learn to do all that?" Charmy asked, obviously stunned by what he had just seen. "I teach a self-defense class at the community center," Snow White said. "We're called the Bad Apples. We meet every Saturday at 4. "Sign me up." "Piper!" Natalie shouted angrily as she got to her feet. The principal stepped out of the shadows. He was carrying a set of bagpipes and looked distraught. "Do it!" the hairy girl raged. "This has gone too far," Hamlin cried. "Let them save their grandmother and her friends. The barrier will still be broken, and they won't pose a threat to you or your father again." "Piper, I'll tell my daddy. He's got your precious Wendell." The principal raised the bagpipe to his mouth, took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he said to the group. He blew a long, soulful note in the air. Everything went blank. "Sabrina, wake up!" a voice shouted from far away. She tried very hard to pay attention, but she was exhausted and dizzy. "Sabrina, you have to wake up now." She slowly opened her eyes. Mr. Hamlin was standing over her with a wild, desperate look on his face. "What are you doing in my bedroom?" she grumbled. "Sabrina, we're under the school," Hamlin said, sounding frantic. "I know it's hard, but try and concentrate." Sabrina looked around and saw she was standing in a huge tunnel where children were rushing back and forth with wheelbarrows full of dirt and rubble. She looked down at herself and saw she was covered in soot and holding a shovel. "Do you understand what's happening to you?" Hamlin said. "No," the girl replied. Her head felt heavy. "I entranced you and your friends. I had to. They have Wendell, and they'll kill him if I don't do what they want." "Where's my sister?" Sabrina demanded. "They've got everyone. Your sister, your grandmother, Charming, Canis, the sheriff, Snow, Puck, and my son, at the end of the tunnel. I managed to send you off into the mines to dig, and so far they haven't noticed." "How long have I been down here?" 6 hours. 6 hours? They could all be dead." "This is the soonest I could get to you," Hamlin said. "They've been watching me, and now that they've tunneled so close to the barrier, they don't seem to care if I ran off." "Oh, and I wouldn't say we don't care," a voice said behind him. Sabrina heard the sound of ripping flesh, and Hamlin fell to the ground. The frog girl was behind him, holding a bloody knife. "You're coming with me," she hissed, grabbing Sabrina roughly by the arm. Sabrina swung her shovel and hit the monster in the head so hard the frog girl fell to the ground, moaning. Sabrina rushed to help Hamlin. "Wendell," Hamlin said as blood pooled beneath him. "You have to find him and get him out of here." "I'll come back for you," Sabrina said, and rushing into the nearest tunnel, with her only weapon, the shovel, slung over her shoulder. She scampered forward, stumbled over jagged rocks, and accidentally kicked over some abandoned tools. Dust lifted into the air and filled her lungs, choking her and making it much harder to concentrate on where she was going. Each step was a challenge to her balance, and unfortunately, her path was complicated. Twisting and turning maze. Every few yards she would spot a child she recognized from school. Each was glassy-eyed, staggering through the tunnels, hauling buckets of broken stone. None of them seemed to notice Sabrina pass them, even when she stopped and begged for directions. They were still under the Piper's spell. At last she spotted a faint light in the distance. As she came closer to it, the tunnel widened dramatically, revealing an enormous room carved out of the Ferry Point Landing bedrock. She paused at the mouth of the room, doing her best to calm herself and listen for any movement. Hearing nothing, she lifted the heavy shovel off her shoulder and entered, swinging the weapon in the air in case anyone was about to ambush her. But she was alone. Only a few old buckets and a couple of tools littered the floor. There were no exits other than the way she had come. The tunnel was a dead end. She raced back the other way, passing more zombie-faced, filth-covered children. I should head in the direction they're coming from, Sabrina realized. She darted down the tunnel, fighting the crowds of children. At one point, Natalie and the Frog Girl came lumbering down the tunnel after her. But Sabrina stepped into a line of children, and being as filthy as they were, went unseen by the monsters. The tunnel went on and on. Some led to massive rooms, while others narrowed to what there was hardly room for two children to stand side by side. But eventually, Sabrina found what appeared to be the end of the dig. The room was high and wide, and filled with boxes of dynamite and mining tools. A few flaming torches illuminated the room, and there were still deep shadows along the walls that Sabrina couldn't see into. Anyone could be hiding there. She knew she was vulnerable. "I've come for my family," she shouted into the cave. Her voice echoed off the stone walls and bounced around her ears. Suddenly, something hit Sabrina squarely in the back. Unable to keep her footing, she tumbled over a sharp rock and fell hard onto her shoulder. A searing pain swam through her veins, followed by a dull, throbbing numbness. She tried to scamper to her feet, but her arms hung loosely on her side. It was broken. She cried out more in frustration than pain, but she grew quiet when she heard an odd clicking and hissing sound, followed by a disturbed laugh. Using her good arm, she picked up the shovel that had slipped from her hand when she'd fallen and swung it around, doing her best to make it seem as if she had not been seriously injured. She walked in small circles, scanning the room for the source of the noise. A long, spindly leg stuck out from the shadows, narrowly missing her head. It slammed against the wall behind her, pulverizing stone into dust. Sabrina lifted the heavy shovel and swung widely at the hairy leg, sinking its sharp edge into the monster's flesh. Shrieks of agony echoed through the cavern. "I'm not going to be easy to kill," she threatened, hoping her voice sounded more confident to the monster than it did to her. "Kill you? This is a party," the voice replied. One of the torches was snatched off the wall. It rose high in the air, shining its light on the ceiling. There, suspended in mounds of thick, horrible spider webs, were her family. "And you're the guest of honor." Dolphine, Granny, Puck, Mr. Canis, Snow White, Sheriff Hampstead, and Mayor Charming hung above, with only their heads free of the sticky spread. Their mouths were covered as well, but Sabrina could hear Dolphine's choked cries and Hammond's angry groans, and knew they were alive. The spider monster slowly crawled out the window and walked along the ceiling. It was gigantic, and as Sabrina stared up at it, she realized it wasn't simply a giant spider. The lower body was spider-like, but the upper body had the chest, heads, and arms of a boy. Even with the huge pincers that jutted out from its mouth, she could tell it was Toby. Surprised, Toby said. Not really, Sabrina admitted. The bad guy is usually the ugly, giggling idiot. Now, I've got a surprise for you, a voice said from behind her. Sabrina spun around and found Natalie standing there. Sabrina noticed her front tooth was now missing. Then someone else stepped out of the shadows. Someone who made Sabrina's heart ache. It was her only potential friend in the entire school, Bella. The blonde girl put her arms around Natalie's shoulder and smirked. You're one of them, aren't you? Sabrina said sadly. Why did you pretend to be my friend? Duh. She's evil, Toby said. He and the girls burst into laughter. You killed Mr. Grumpner, Sabrina gasped. Yes, I did. He was just too nosy and way too heavy with the homework. Don't forget Charlie, Bella said, patting Natalie on the back. They just kept getting in the way of our father's plans. And we will go on to the next one.